May what I say and what you hear be in the name of God. Amen. So this morning I'm going to do something different. This is not a sermon, it's my testimony. A personal witness to you about an experience I had meeting God in the Dominican Republic in 1994. And I just want to preface with saying this, that there's no implicit message that anyone else needs to experience God the way I did. Everyone experiences God differently and knows God in a different way. And this just happens to be the way God revealed himself to me at a particular time and in a particular place. So in 1994, about a year after Carol and I were married, and I had been at Church of the Transfiguration in Lake St. Louis since 1988, and things were not going well. And they hadn't been going well. I was still really green out of seminary, those poor folks. I just let them down, I think, more than once. But things just were getting so bad that I was at a point where if I didn't have some sort of personal revival, I was going to leave ordained ministry for good, somehow. Of course, a master's degree in divinity and $3 will get you a coffee at Starbucks. So I got on the phone and called the priest who had been my mentor in seminary. His name is John Guernsey. At the time, he was the rector of All Saints Dale City. And I told him what was going on in my life, and he said, "Ben, you need to go on a mission trip." I'm nodding at the phone like, oh, why did I call you? I don't know why I thought that. It just, going on a mission trip was just not something that ever occurred to me. And to make part of this long story shorter, I ended up getting connected with a mission group, and this was under the auspices of an organization called SOMA, Sharing of Ministries Abroad. And the leader of this particular team was a priest by the name of David Foster, who at one time, interestingly, had been the curate of my former bishop in northern Indiana. Dave Foster, to describe him, it's hard to describe him. I've never met an Episcopal priest like him ever. He's more Pentecostal than he is Episcopalian, which in this particular case turned out to be a good thing. We connected on the phone before I went on this trip, and by the way, I also learned that this trip was going to be in the Dominican Republic, and I thought, well, I don't speak Spanish, how is this going to work? But David said, look, we'll let the Lord figure that out, okay? You just come. And this was in a phone call, and we ended the phone call, he was praying for me, and near the end of the time he was praying for me, he began to say things about my life that there's no way, nothing, he couldn't have known these things. Things about my divorce, things about what was going on at Transfiguration in Lake St. Louis, and I was really quite blown away with that, so much so that I had to interrupt the phone call, and I said, David, you're talking about stuff that, how do you know this stuff? And he said, well, it's not me, it's the Lord. And I said, okay, fair enough. Remember, I grew up in the charismatic renewal movement of the Episcopal Church, so I'm familiar with things like words of knowledge, prophecy, and this particular trip, I think if I were to say what was the biggest gift that was manifest, it was prophecy. And prophecy means forthtelling. It's speaking for God. It isn't really about the future, but it can be about the future, as sometimes the prophets of the Old Testament would predict a famine, for example, or the prophet Isaiah predicted with quite accuracy the way the Messiah would be crucified, the way the Messiah would die. So it isn't as if prophets never said anything about the future, or God speaking through them never said anything about the future. And that's important for you to know as time goes on. So I got on a plane. I flew to Miami, and then I flew to Santo Domingo. And we gathered at the airport and then drove to a nearby church. And there were 3 other people, so David and 3 other people whose names I can no longer remember, and myself. So there were 5 of us. And I discovered, when we entered this church, we went into this room, and David said, well, we're going to pray now. And I figured out after that whenever he said that, I needed to prepare myself because it was going to be a long time. And we prayed for 2 hours, probably. And a lot of that time was in silence, just waiting for God to speak. And I have to tell you that drives me crazy. I'm ADD, okay? And I found myself very frustrated. And then I learned that Dave was coming to this mission trip with no plan of what to do. And that really upset me. It was, we're just going to wait. We're going to let the Lord decide what we're going to do. And I thought, you know, Lord, I know that you can do anything, but I do believe that you give people gifts like planning. However, I hung in there with it, and during that first prayer time, some other folks eventually began to describe what they're like metaphors. They were images that were metaphors of things that might happen. And so, for example, the one that really I remember well was, I think it was one of the women on the team said that she saw this vision of, she was in a car and the car had a flat, and she went to the trunk to get the spare and the jack, and she couldn't get anything to work. And then the Lord shows up and takes over and does it for her. And that, along with some other images that people shared, what we had pieced together was that whatever it was we were going to do, we would only get so far with our own tools and our own abilities and our own skills before we would come up against a barrier, and then the Lord would have to take it the rest of the way, whatever that meant. So the retreat that we led, there were actually 2 retreats, and they were in the mountain area of Jarabacoa. And the retreat center, very, very modest, as you might expect from a country like the Dominican Republic that is, poor for the most part. And the conference center didn't have any walls, for example. It was just like a metal roof. And there was a building where we slept, and the bathrooms didn't have toilet seats. I hope the women did, but it was really that kind of, it was really sparse. And there were 2 retreats. One was for laity, and the first one was for clergy, and then the second one was for the laity. And every time we started, Dave would have us begin with prayer, and another couple of hour session before the clergy arrived, and then the clergy retreat went on, and there's nothing that really leaps out at me about that, except that it was during that retreat that I decided, well, okay, I don't speak Spanish, so I'm just going to pray throughout the whole time. And by the way, what Dave and the rest of us decided we were going to do for this retreat was, in essence, if you're familiar at all with Cursillo, Cursillo is a short course in Christianity, and so each member of the team, except for me, took some component of Christian theology and used it as a talk. There was lots of prayer, there was worship, laying on of hands for healing, and that kind of thing. So while that was going on, I would wander around the perimeter of not a big place. There was a fence that marked the perimeter of the property, and I just sort of made circles around this place praying. Every once in a while, I would go to the area where everyone was gathered. Remember, there are no walls. And I would just sort of wander around and just pray over the whole group. So the clergy retreat ended, and one of the priests who had been there decided to stay and help translate for the next retreat. And, of course, when the clergy left, then Dave gathered us all together to pray again for a long time again. And as the prayer was going on, I got an image in something came to me, and as I'm reflecting on what I'm seeing in my mind's eye, I'm having this argument with God. I'm not sharing this. I'm not talking about this, Lord. No way. And of course, God won the argument. And so this is what I shared. I said, well, all right, what I see is some people are praying for someone, and this person is something's wrong because this person, he or she, falls to the ground and starts rolling around, acting like they're demonically possessed. And I said, as I'm watching this, something exits this person's body. It looks like a dog. I mean, a huge dog. Like a caricature of a bulldog out of a cartoon almost. And when it exited, it made a beeline for the property line and turned around on the other side of the fence and just barked angrily back at everyone else. So I put that out there, and I'm embarrassed. I think I'm red-faced. I'm thinking, this is stupid. This is just so stupid. That's how insecure I was. So the lay retreat begins, and I'm doing what I was doing, just praying around the property and over the whole group. And then that evening, they broke up into groups. All these lay people broke off into groups, each led by pairs of team members, including the priest who had stayed behind to help translate. And they're praying, and then suddenly this woman just falls to the ground and starts yelling and screaming. And that went on for a long time. In fact, it went on so long that everyone else had finally gone to bed, and we took this young woman, who happened, by the way, to also be the wife of one of the priests from the previous retreat, into the common room of this building where we were sleeping. And Dave, in the name of Jesus, doing all the stuff that I knew you would do if you were trying to do some sort of exorcism. And remember that metaphor? The metaphor that we first heard? It was as if nothing was working. Nothing was working. This person was not being relieved. Finally, I went to Dave and I pulled him aside and I said, Dave, you're done. Okay, I'm putting a stop to this right now. This has gone on for too long. I'm tired. She's exhausted. And in my own mind, I'm thinking this is getting close to being abusive. And so I just put an end to it, and I did not back down. Dave protested and wanted to keep going, and I just told him, absolutely not, you're done. So we all retired for the evening. I had learned long ago to bring earplugs to these kind of things because I'm a light sleeper, so I stick my earplugs in my ear, and my head hit the pillow, and I was out. And then at some point in the night, and I don't know how long I'd been asleep, I was awakened by what sounded like a dog barking. And I remember getting up, not all the way up out of bed, but sort of lifting my head up out of bed, pulled one plug out of my ear to listen. I didn't hear anything. I stuck the plug back in, back to sleep. Now keep in mind, I'm not putting one and one together. I'm not connecting any dots at all. I probably was too tired to connect any dots. That morning, I got up, made some coffee, or someone had made some coffee, and I got a cup of coffee, and I'm wandering around the property like I've been doing, and the priest who had stayed behind to help translate was approaching me with the young woman from the night before. And so they came up to me, and this young woman says through the translator that God had come to her in a dream and had delivered her in the middle of the night. And then God said to go to me to, in essence, seal the deal. I guess that's what I did. I mean, because I'm standing there with this cup of coffee. And I just stuck my hand out, laid it on her head, made the sign of the cross on her forehead, and that was it. Nice, quiet voice, the low-key Ben Jones approach, and that was it. So the rest of the retreat went on, and then at the end, there was time for, sharing, like happens in these kind of things, like what was your experience and that kind of thing. And this young woman got up and told this story. She said that when she was in grammar school, she was coming home from school and was passing in front of the house of someone who everyone in the neighborhood knew was a practitioner of voodoo. And she fell and had hurt her ankle and was not able to get up. And a dog came out of the house to attack her, which she thought was going to attack her, but as this animal got closer and closer to her, it got smaller and smaller and smaller and entered her through her ankle. And it's at that point that all the members of the team whiplashed to look at me. The light had suddenly dawned that what the Lord had said to me wasn't a metaphor. It was actual stuff that I couldn't have known anything about. I didn't know this woman from Adam. And for her to tell that story was beyond belief. Later that night, I thought to myself, did that just happen? How can that have happened? That doesn't make any sense to me. How could it be so detailed? How could God have told me something so detailed? And a few days later, I hope you find this as funny as we did. We're in somebody's home, and we're in the living room, and we're talking about baptism. I don't remember the details, but of course, baptism involves water. In the middle of this conversation on baptism, there's this on the door. And the owner of the home goes to the front door. It's the watery delivery person with 5 gallons, those 5-gallon jugs of water. When the water came in, we just burst out into laughter at the humor, as if God was just kind of saying, ha ha ha, I see, I am real. And I got home. When I got home, I remember crawling into bed with Carolyn and weeping and telling her that I saw God. I made it through the first service without doing this. So, I'm here to tell you that as far as this priest is concerned, God is no mere idea. God is a person. And the person that I encountered in the Dominican Republic for a very brief time was Jesus. I know it as much as I know anything. I know that it was Jesus. It was there. Jesus was the one talking to us, obviously through the Spirit. Jesus was the one who was doing all this incredible stuff. And I think for me, the learning point for this is, and I wish I could tell you that I've been able to apply it, but I've not done a very good job of it. I think that what I learned was that in this country, we associate activity and busyness with productivity and forget that some of the most productive things that we can do involve doing nothing, involve silence and solitude, and genuine listening. And I mean the kind of listening where you actually expect that God is going to talk. But I think it takes 2 hours because we're so filled with busyness in our minds, in our lives, it takes that long just for our brains to get calmed down enough to hear what God has to say. So that's my encouragement to you. First, that God is real. No mere idea that God is a person whose name is Jesus. And to really consider the power of prayer in your own life, of taking even just 10 minutes out of your day to be silent before the Lord. I think that if more and more people were able to do that every day, can you imagine what could happen to our churches and to our ministries because we were open to the God who speaks and acts? Amen.